Next, we have an overview of the proposed redevelopment project area for the Central Carried Tax Increment Financing District, TIF number 3, along with the eligibility report, housing impact study, and the redevelopment plan and project in relation thereto for village, for our TIF. Our TIF consultant, Ryan Kane McKenna and Associates, will handle this part of this.
Mr. Chairman, would you prefer I talk from the lectern or here?
Wherever you're most comfortable.
Thank you. I'm Phil McKenna, and this is Brett Michelson with Ryan Kane McKenna. And we've been the TIF consultants working on this project all along. So the points that we want to cover today are just the basics of TIF fundamentals for all the board members in the audience, the TIF redevelopment plan and project, the village strategic planning objectives and how they fit into the plan and project, the specific qualification factors, some key elements within the TIF plan. It's a lengthy document. We want to point out some of the really important things and the process and the next steps involved in that. Go next one. Okay. We look upon TIF as really sort of building blocks or arrows. If you view an economic development goals, what's contained in the comprehensive plan? And in this case, not only the comp plan, but the downtown strategic plan of several years ago. What do they say about what are the goals of the community with respect to that area? In point of fact, those goals need to be articulated in the TIF plan, and one of the findings you'll see that we've made is that the TIF plan itself is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the downtown strategic plan. So it's from that the TIF plan is formulated, and that the TIF plan itself addresses the particular, RPA just stands for TIF, redevelopment project area, and then the objectives, plans, and specific strategies are discussed in that document, which Scott alluded to. I'd like to make TIF fairly simple, represented by two buckets. So the bucket on my left is the bucket in which all of the revenues now go to local governments based upon the current EAV. To the extent that there is growth in the equalized assessed valuation multiplied by the annual tax rate, that's the second bucket. That's the bucket of the incremental revenues that represents the TIF. There's no increase in taxes. Nobody within a TIF pays any more nor any less taxes. McHenry County comes out, does the assessment, all the taxing districts submit their rates. That's what the tax bill is going to be. What TIF does is this division into two buckets. The bucket that represents the base evaluation and the bucket that represents the increase in the valuation that presumptively has been a large part as a result of the TIF intervention on the part of the village. We'll go to the next one. This is just hypothetical. It's just showing you, and I can't tell the colors, so you have to help me with that. But it's just saying what the base is, what a potential increase in TIF would be at a very modest level. And obviously the diagonal line all the way to the top is what I'd call a grand slam home run. That's what we'd like the TIF to do. We can't guarantee that. The differential, the delta between those line items at the end of the TIF represents what's termed the recovered value. The recovered value is then all available for a large amount for all the taxing districts. And when I say for all the taxing districts, it's always on the basis of the percentage of the total tax bill that each taxing district represents. We go to the next one. These are some of, I'll just go over these quickly. These are some of the background steps that the village has taken before that led to the desire to be able to implement the tax increment finance district to achieve these goals. So the 2021 strategic plan, it was intended to be a future guide for investment and development activity and had a focus on the downtown area. The comp plan identifies economic development goals and objectives, and particularly points out supporting the existing businesses and local employers in Cary to attract additional employment and tax-generating uses. What you'll see as we move forward on this is there is a big emphasis on maintaining the same character of the downtown and paying attention to the needs of existing businesses in terms of rehabilitation of structures, helping with facade improvements, and helping with public improvements that directly mean more foot traffic to the businesses in the downtown area. So the comp plan and the downtown strategic plan both call for the use of tax increment financing as a tool to facilitate what the objectives are. The comp plan and the downtown strategic plan both state that the village should establish and market a package of economic development incentives and tools to new and existing developers. And I think in part, I don't want to read into that too much, but I think in part, if you look at,
I don't think your microphone is still on, sorry.
I'm sorry,
Is your microphone still on?
is this microphone on? No. All right.
Yeah, sorry to
This
interrupt
one on?
you.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Do you need me to go back at all, sir? Okay, thank you for pointing it out. But I think when we look at the comprehensive plan and downtown strategic plan and then the TIF plan, what we're saying is that TIF's never going to be a panacea, but it's a valuable tool in the toolbox to be able to drive new development and to support the businesses that are there right now. So if we go to the next one. Okay. So the TIF redevelopment project and plan objectives are to address what the ongoing issues are within the proposed TIF district. That's basically the qualification factors that need to be remediated. To encourage redevelopment of underutilized buildings or sites, reduce or eliminate impediments to private development, and coordinate redevelopment activities. Overall, to further the goals and objectives that have already been set forth in village documents. And I'd remind everybody, there were public hearings with respect to those documents. There was much discussion, much community input. So it's they serve as the basis for what the village is seeking to do with the TIF district. This is the map. I know that was up before. The excluded areas are one house on the left there and a residential area on the right, because there isn't any intent at this point in time to do anything with the solely residential area. So then we go to the TIF Act compliance, and this is something that Scott alluded to. The TIF plan must, and in our opinion does, conform with the comprehensive plan. The proposed TIF district is contiguous parcels and exceeds 1.5 acres. The proposed TIF meets the minimum number of TIF Act criteria for a conservation area, and the but-for requirement is met. In terms of that last one in particular, when we look at a but-for requirement, we're looking to say, gee, are there development proposals on the table? Has anybody been interested in this site? And if so, have they said they're willing to redevelop it without any incentive assistance? We're aware, and I think the village is aware as well, of multiple developers who are interested in various sites within the downtown area, but not without some incentive. Excuse me. And that's not inconsistent with what you're seeing in a number of downtowns throughout the metro area. Fox River Grove has a TIF district. They're considering Barrington, downtown Barrington. We've done ones in Itasca, in Glen Ellen, in communities all over where they're trying to maintain the character of the community as the village is here. But at the same time, the marketplace is saying, okay, if you want new development to occur, particularly transit-oriented development, then there's going to need to be some mechanism involved in it. There's sometimes a question, well, does it have to be TIF? Well, there are some other tools out there. There's a special service area, which would help with infrastructure improvement. Downside is anybody in special service area is going to pay increased property taxes. There's a so-called business district. Business district is the imposition of an additional 1% sales tax within that area. That's not necessarily a good idea when you're trying to help out particularly small businesses within an area. Works well in places like major malls. Old Orchard has one. Oakbrook Terrace has one. In those major malls, it works, but it's not a good tool. So we did, as part of the process, we looked through what other tools would be, and that was part of the determination of the but-for. But for the TIF, which is the mechanism that we're recommending in this case, we don't believe that the desired development would occur. If we go on to the next one. Because there were more than 75 dwelling units within this TIF, we were also by act required to do a housing impact study. There's currently no plans whatsoever for any kind of displacement of any residents, but the housing impact study does take a look at what would happen if something happens in the future and relocation assistance were necessary. If there is any displacement of residents, it would be likely to occur because a private developer came in, agreed on a purchase price with an existing homeowner, so a willing seller, willing buyer, and that there was some dislocation as a result of that, then the plan provides for alternatives to that. The village intends clearly to have the private marketplace do the work. Not any attempt to take over any properties, but to help the private marketplace reach a reasonable and fair transaction if that's good for the area as a whole. Go to the next one, Scott. Sometimes you get TIF districts that seem like they're just too large altogether. So what this slide shows is that both for 2021 tax year and 2022 tax year, the relative impact, taking the EAV of TIF 3 as a percentage of the taxing district's EAV. As you can see, the biggest impact is the village of Cary itself. School District 26 and the Cary Park District are about the same level, and it takes it down, obviously, on the basis of how large the EAV is for each entity. We do a number of TIF districts, probably 400 or 500 altogether now. I would say as a marker, somewhere between 5 and 10% is more the norm. So this is actually a little bit below the norm in terms of the size of the equalized assessed valuation. Go to the next one, Scott. Okay, so I won't spend a lot of time reading all of this. You can read it at your leisure. But again, we're building on the comp plan and the downtown strategic plan. So what are our objectives? We want to refine and strengthen the very character that exists in downtown Cary right now. We want to provide for attractive new commercial development. We want to strengthen the market position, enhance the physical environment of the downtown, and we definitely want to provide for what's some antiquated infrastructure and interconnection of transportation that consists of roads, sidewalks, trails, bike paths, public transportation, to facilitate efficient and movement of vehicles and pedestrians. And as you all know, that's a particular challenge with train tracks running through the area as well. Go to the next one. So what would the TIF designation do with respect to following strategies already discussed? Well, redevelopment of sites with strong potential for infill or redevelopment as higher intensity uses. So that might, for example, be a couple parcels that are vacant land at this point in time to help redevelop those parcels. We talked a little bit about this, but I can't emphasize it enough. A major purpose of TIF is to promote the existing businesses that are there. Facade and building improvements are eligible under the TIF Act. Explore opportunities to activate underutilized spaces and connect a network of public and private open spaces. Village is very sensitive to having that interplay with the public and private spaces and seeks to do everything possible to increase public meeting places, beautification, et cetera. Obviously improve the pedestrian experience of downtown. And the key intersections, particularly with US 14 and West Main Street, to provide improvements that help the flow of traffic within the area to help the businesses out. So the next one is the TIF designation. Again, going back to the 2021 comp plan and the 2015 comp plan and 2021 downtown strategic plan, we're proposing the TIF as being key for repositioning and revitalizing the existing properties, for long-term financial stability for the district and for all the other taxing districts, and achieving the economic development goals of the village. So now let's go to something that's very pertinent to your deliberations. We are qualifying this as a conservation area. What a conservation area means is that more than 50% of the structures are 35 years of age or older. There's 209 structures in the proposed TIF district. 175 of them, or 83%, are over 35 years. The TIF statute requires 50%. This is not necessarily a statutory provision, but I know the authors of the statute. The other thing a conservation area is trying to say is that it's probably an older area. It suffers from some age-related factors, obsolescence and other things. But we really want to conserve what the nature of the area is. We don't want to do a whole new remake. The good existing businesses downtown we want to help. We want to make it more user-friendly, and therefore we want to literally conserve the area as it is. So if you have more than 50% of the structures 35 years of age or older, then you have to meet 3 out of 13 qualification factors. A key to this, and I can't emphasize this one enough, is that this does not mean that every single parcel demonstrates these characteristics. It's the area as a whole. The area must be deemed to say that the qualification factors are reasonably distributed to a meaningful extent throughout the proposed TIF district. So they're not all just in one little block and not throughout the district. So let's go to the qualification factors that we found. So we said 3 are necessary. We found 6 as listed there, and we're gonna go into some detail on each one. So deterioration was the first one. Deterioration, according to the TIF Act, is found when buildings or surface improvements are in need of some improvement on the basis of showing deterioration through efforts. We had several site visits throughout the area, matrices, pictures, et cetera. The site improvements themselves showed a lot of sprawling, potholes, depressions, weed growth, failed paint striping, faded paint striping, a lot of things that you would expect in an area that just needs some revamping there. If we go to the next one. The Act states the deterioration also can be found in building improvements. And again, I emphasize this is not all buildings, but we did find buildings, particularly older buildings, with cracked or damaged building surfaces, facades in needs of tuck pointing, faded, peeling paint, deteriorated windows or doors or frames, rusted metal service doors, rusted metal fencing, damaged gutters or downspouts. And I might say, you know, there's a tie-in back to what TIF can do, because these are things that are more of a rehabilitation nature. So that's one of the things that TIF can be used for. That's the nexus, if you will, between the purposes of TIF and the actual qualification factors. Okay, if we go to the next one, lack of community planning. This, again, relates to age. 53% of the buildings were built prior to 1963. That was the first comprehensive plan of the village. So they didn't have the benefit of a comprehensive plan. 26% of the parcels in the study area are currently non-conforming existing uses. This is just something to be able to say the village has updated its comprehensive plan, and therefore a majority of the structures are not in compliance with the current comprehensive plan. Again, good structures, we have this finding under the Act in terms of something that usually follows along with some age. The next factor was inadequate utilities. This is, again, very heavily related to age. You've got wells that are immediately adjacent to the study area that have been taken offline because they were inadequate. You've got 50 private lead service lines that would need to be replaced. You've got existing overhead utility poles that should be buried because they limit the amount of the right-of-way for pedestrians, and they don't conform to the comprehensive plan. So those are factors related to the inadequate utilities, as well as some of the buildings along US Route 14 experience frozen water and sanitary service lines during the extremely cold winters. One of the various village's primary goals in this study area is the development of Jack's Channel site along Route 14, which is not currently served with water or sewer utilities. So a big thing here is we've got, where we have utilities, they're older utilities, they need to be replaced. Doesn't mean that TIF is going to take care of all that, but it's one component that can help replace those, again, for the benefit of the residents and the benefit of the businesses. The next factor is the lag or decline in EAV. This is really an important factor. The Act itself says that you reach this factor if in 3 out of the last 5 tax years, the growth in the study area or the TIF area was less than the growth in the village as a whole. We found it not in 3 of the last 5 years, but in all 5 of the last years. What this really means is that, in effect, the rest of the village is subsidizing the lack of appropriate growth within the particular TIF district. So just in the 2022 column, as you can see, there was a 8.2% growth in the village as a whole. There was some growth in the proposed TIF area, but it was only 6.25%. So all taxing districts weren't able to take advantage of that growth to the same extent they were as to the growth in the AV of the village as a whole. And we go to the next one. Obsolescence, again, heavily related to age of the area. It's present due to the physical conditions in some cases, but I'd say principally to the age and the building orientation. The village's downtown strategic plan noted that obsolete structures, including small, compact, and narrow parcel sizes, when that plan was performed, 65% of the structures in the study area are over 50 years of age. 43% of the structures in the study area are more than 100 years of age. So again, we're talking about structures that house very, very important businesses, but we're talking about things that are aged, that are suffering from some obsolescence, which again, to emphasize, the TIF can help out by virtue of repositioning those structures. And the last one is deleterious land use or layout. This is found in the current alignment along US Route 14, particularly in the downtown area and the crossings that are there. The comp plan has noted this in the past as something that needs to be taken care of. The alignment challenges property owners east of the Union Pacific line, and it's a challenge to property owners that can affect their business, so anything that can be done to alleviate that will be helpful. 7 parcels in the downtown area have multiple structures with different uses. That's again a function of the obsolescence and the age, but it's something that we can help out with the TIF. So those are the summary of the factors, and obviously we're willing to go into whatever other detail the Joint Review Board would like us to do. If we go into the next one, were key elements of the TIF plan. I know it's like a 50-page document, so we just want to hit some of the highlights of that. The proposed land uses are a mix of commercial, retail, mixed-use, residential, and recreational uses. Not really different than the types of uses that are there now, and any particular uses in the future will be thoroughly reviewed by the village board. The proposed budget, $60 million, and that, I will tell you, that sounds high, but we're talking about a 23-year period of time. None of us have a crystal ball, but when we go through on the next slide what the particulars are, I think we need to say over that period of time, there are going to be, because of the aged infrastructure and other reasons, there's going to be a need for up to $60 million. The base equalized assessed valuation based upon 2022 data, and I think it's still preliminary at this time, so it's not, it may not be exactly this amount, but it will be close. $28.5 million is the current EAV in the area. The projected EAV, again, over a 23-year period of time, is that this could grow to over $100 to $125 million. If we go to the next slide, we can see the budget. The larger items to point out on this are the demolition, site prep, environmental cleanup, and related cost of $15 million. That's, again, based upon willing buyer and seller. That's to be able to take care of new development that would occur within the area. Public improvements, big needs here. Inadequate utilities, infrastructure, $32 million. And the other significant one is the bottom line one, estimated school district cost, library cost. The TIF Act says that the first 40% of an increment in each year that's collected has to be set aside and held separate. So to the extent that there are school students produced by any new development, that the schools are entitled to the first lien position on that amount. So just to make it overly simplistic, if $1 million came in a given year, first thing the village has to do is put $400,000, if you will, into a safety account. And then when the schools come with their reports on how many new students were generated, you take that, multiply it by what are the state of Illinois, I think it's called the report card, the exact figure. So again, making up numbers, let's say you had 10 new students, and let's say you had $10,000 was the state dictated number. Then $100,000 would be immediately taken out of that TIF in order to reimburse the schools in accordance with the TIF Act. Similarly, library is entitled to 2%. So that means 40% plus 2% for the library. 42% is set aside before the village can do anything on it. The library is on the basis of patrons, so it's similarly, the library would submit to the village, 5, 10, whatever number of new patrons were a result of the TIF financing, and would submit that. So that's the first lien position. And I emphasize that because the village can't do anything else. I have developers who will come in and say, I need 90% of the increment. I say, is it a mixed use or a housing development? And I say, you can't. 42% has to be set aside initially. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, this is just the next steps. I should also point out there's been a lot of steps taken already, a lot of transparency that I've seen with the village. There were several discussions with the village board before there was even a determination to move forward and look at a qualification study or redevelopment plan. There's an interested parties registry that exists in which anybody in or outside of the village can sign up, receive all of the documentation that they want. Notice has obviously gone to the taxing districts. There's also notice that's going to be sent out to not only property owners within the TIF district, but to all residents within 750 feet of the TIF district, so they're aware of the public hearing. There was a public meeting already held, as required by law, but also I think a lot of good input, a lot of good sharing occurred on that. So beyond the actions that this body decides to take and whatever number of meetings that takes, July 18th is scheduled for the village public hearing. If that is favorable, if the village board wants to move forward, then they would need to take 2 separate steps. The existing TIF District 2 needs to be terminated, and at the next meeting after that, the village board would consider the adoption of the 3 ordinances that Scott's going to go on over later on. A couple of important footnotes here. After adoption, there's no automatic who gets the money. It's treated just like every other budget. It's a separate budget, but it all has to go before the village board. Any expenditure of TIF monies in any respect whatsoever is going before the village board. In addition, any redevelopment, anybody wants to do anything, including a small rehab project or a major redevelopment someplace, it has to go through the same planning and zoning process as the village provides for any other development. And ultimately, any redevelopment agreement is going to be subject to public scrutiny, to a public hearing, and to ultimate adoption or refinement or rejection, if you will, by the village board. And then finally, to assure that annually there's required to be a TIF audit. There's a TIF annual report that's filed with the state of Illinois that's made available to all Joint Review Board members as well as anyone else. It's usually posted on the website. And then there are annual Joint Review Board meetings that are to consider all of the additional documentation that's come in and to make any recommendations to the village board in moving forward. So, Mr. Chairman, that's it.
Thank you, Phil. Does anybody have any questions right now for our consultants?
I have a quick one. First, thank you for that detailed overview. It was very helpful coming in new to this board. With regards to, I think it was slide number 28 or so, where you went over the TIF Act and the first and second lead, including the school boards and the library.
Yes.
You mentioned a number of 42%.
Right.
When I look at here, you calculate $6 million. Can you just help us understand how that was calculated, being that that's only 10% of the overall amount?
Good point. I think basically, I'll be clear, it was sort of back of the envelope, okay? The important number here is the total. Let's say, for example, that that line item, the estimated school district tuition, let's say it wound up being $12 million, okay? Again, that's first lien money. That has to come out first. So what would happen in that case is that the village would have to reduce a corresponding line item. So again, if it wasn't 6, it was up to 12. They got to find somewhere else in the budget of $6 million to reduce, whether it's in public improvements or whether it's in demolition, site prep, whatever it may be. So it's 2 things. One, it's a plug number, because that's a very difficult, as you know, it's very difficult to project what the net new students is going to be. So that was the best estimates, but again, emphasizing, because that's a first lien, if that's not enough money, then out of the 60 million, the village has to reduce some other category.
One other clarifying question for the public here, benefit. When we look at, and you stated something to the effect that with this lien, the reimbursement equates to that of the cost of new students that this TIF may be producing. Is it not true that that reimbursement is considerably less than the CAFR's report, the audited financial statements on the actual cost to educate kids in the area?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question. Obviously, I can't speak to individual school districts in terms of cost. So what the statute says is you take, I believe it's called the state report card. You probably know better than I do, okay? The statute requires that you take whatever the number is in the state report card, and you multiply that times the number of students. I would not sit here by any means to say that that's the actual cost to the student. I suspect it's not the actual cost to the student. And, you know, there may merit some discussion with the village at any point in time. One of the things that I've seen, and I've only seen this recently, but I've seen that there's correspondence annually, like, just use that figure of 10,000, so 10,000 is a number for a school district, 10 students come in, so there's $100,000. So one of the things I've seen is school districts also submit, however, this is how this compares with our actual cost per student. And therefore, we would like to discuss this with the village at the next joint review board meeting. That's just, obviously, it's a policy matter, but I think that's a good dialogue that can go on.
Sure. And based on your projections, do you have any estimates based on the types of development and birth rates and things of that nature, that how many potential students could be produced, if that's the right word, during the 23-year period for this TIF as proposed?
Yeah, I don't know that we had specifics. I think what we used instead was just examples that we're involved in. We have, you know, we have a development that was completed 2 years ago in downtown Winfield. It's about 125, 130 units, and in the first year, there was one student produced. We have one in downtown Villa Park. It hasn't actually gotten up and running yet, but the projections there, I think, were for 6 students. We have had others in downtown Elmhurst, Villa Park, Itasca, other places around there, and we're working on a particular one, a possible one in Barrington and Fox River Grove now, and about 10 students is what we're using as for, this is for multifamily projects, you know, transit-oriented development. About 10 students is what we're seeing as the top estimate altogether. So it's actually, I guess I didn't realize it, but that's why I use that 10 in terms of that example. We're not seeing a lot of net new students because we're generally seeing that the market developments that come in tend to be young singles or people who are in retirement. But again, to emphasize, and the main point there is that whatever the number of net new students comes in, that has to be taken care of first before anything else is.
Thank you.
Sure.
One thing I'd like to clarify on that too, when you look at the area of our TIF right now, or what we're proposing, any new potential development will most likely be more commercial, which won't be generating any children. We are also talking with developers now about luxury high-end apartments. Those typically don't capture students. Our most recent development that we had that was people were concerned about was our Garden Place apartments. People thought there was going to be an influx of students coming from that development. I believe I think it's under, for the sake of the art, I believe there's under 12 students. If there's even 9 or 10 students that come out of that 60-unit development. So when you look at the area that we're proposing for this TIF, it's very unlikely that we're going to have students being generated from this TIF. We're looking at the whole corridor. Everybody kind of gravitates towards the Maplewood area. Yeah, that's part of it, but it's not the TIF district. The TIF district, as you looked at the map, is from the river all the way to Cary-Algonquin Road. If you look at that, it's a majority of those development in that area is commercial or business related, not generating any students. So the benefit of this for our education system is that they will be receiving new growth with no impact. Is there going to be a potential of additional new students produced if there was a Maplewood development? Possibly, but the last developer that we talked to about this said that they weren't projecting any students coming from that because it was all going to be young adults, to the point where they were only having studio 1 and 2-bedroom apartments, not accounting for any type of students. So, we look at these things very seriously, and when we're looking at, it's not all about, it's about the infrastructure. It's about how we're able to bring new, meaningful, sustainable development to our community. And we're looking for your feedback on this, and we're hoping that you understand that the impact of this particular TIF for new students is going to be minimal.
I just want to respond to that. I appreciate your clarification. Thank you for the presentation. Our concern, I would agree that there are not going to be as many impact from the students that come from that property, but that's still property the districts could still receive tax money or EAV from, correct? Mm-hmm. So even though we may pay impact fees, I don't know what they're called for the TIF because of so many students, the district is still, the revenue that's being generated there because of new development still will not get that because that's being deferred to the village. Is that correct?
I believe that would be correct, but you're still entitled to the impact fees.
Correct, yeah.
Phil, thank you for that presentation. I do appreciate your thoroughness. I have a question regarding the statement when you were talking about the lag in EAV, and I wonder if we can go back to that slide, if that's possible.
Sure.
When this calculation was run, did this take into account the new growth or new property that was added in the previous tax year? In other words, when you look at your overall village EAV as it grows as a whole, included in the previous tax year was new growth, which then gets added on to that next year. My question really being, is that accounted for in these calculations, or is that in essence an artificial inflation, to your percentages? Because as you have surrounding property that's growing, new subdivisions coming online, that's adding to the base EAV or the total EAV for the village, but then you're only taking one segment of this TIF district out. I'm saying is that it can affect your percentages. Was that taken into account?
Okay, can you comment on that?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, actually.
If I could ask, I'm hard of hearing. Could you do the microphone? That might help.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Simply asking, is the previous tax year's new growth or new property taken into account in these calculations and into the next year?
Yes.
Okay. So in other words, as Village of Cary has grown in areas outside of this district, it's adding new EAV coming online, inflating the overall EAV for the village. And I guess I'm suggesting that could be disproportionate to this TIF district because you have other areas growing, which is creating an increase. The new growth or the increase in EAV village-wide, may or may not necessarily be, the TIF district may or may not be lagging because that new growth is artificially inflating the overall base EAV.
Well, I think I understand. That's the balance of the EAV, that's the village as a whole, how fast
That's
that's
right.
growing, okay? So what it's showing is that the TIF is not doing as well as the village as a whole. When that happens, there's effectively a subsidy that's provided by the rest of the residents, the businesses in the area. So let's say the taxing district's total levy does not change whatsoever. What it does is it shifts who's paying for that altogether. We did just sort of a back-of-the-envelope shift, and we said, okay, as a result of 5 years of the EAV within the TIF not growing the same as the village, if it had grown the same as the village, what would the difference be? It's not a huge amount, but it's about $100,000. So it's just saying that, you know, obviously we meet the statutory criteria of 3 out of 5 years, but we also did sort of a sensitivity test. Is this having an effect on the residents and businesses that exist there right now? And we found, yes, they're paying approximately $100,000 more than they would have paid if that growth in the proposed TIF district were the same as the growth in the village as a whole.
Yeah, as noted before, I did not have a chance to review the report, given its late receipt, so I want to dig into that a little bit further. But I do appreciate the response.
Okay, thank you.
Before we have any other questions from the board, I kind of jumped over the public comment. Is there anybody here that would like to ask any questions or have a comment regarding the discussion so far? Please come up. If you could just state your name and address, come up here, like last night.
Same questions. Renee Marin. My question is about the Arlington Club, and maybe you might be able to help because the Arlington Club is next to Jack's Channel, and all of your redevelopment is downtown. I don't know how the Arlington Club became part of this TIF because we maintain our area. It's not like the city streets, and I know there are certain areas when you came down 14 that you scooped out, and it was not the entire time that this plan was on the table. So back a year ago, I think, previously, like probably 18 months ago, the Arlington Club was not on the TIF plan, and then all of a sudden, in the middle of it, it became on the TIF plan.
I can answer it broadly, but
Yeah, this is the perfect opportunity to answer this question.
Okay.
This is the forum.
Broad standpoint, you need to have contiguity. So it may just be for that purpose. But Brian,
Brian Simmons, did you want to answer that question, please?
Certainly. So the village, when we looked at the TIF area that was to be designated, there are certain sites that we're looking at for potential public improvements that could be performed. So the Arlington Club was looked at from a standpoint that it currently is not on village utilities due to the distance it is from the existing utilities, water and sewer. That area was included from a standpoint that if the TIF is to perform well, there's the opportunity that the TIF can help pay or finance for improvements that could extend those utilities down to that area that could benefit the property in the long term. The area that was excluded in the Hilltop subdivision, that was excluded because it did have existing utilities that were in there that were not identified, that there was significant improvements that needed to be made within, that the TIF could potentially pay for. They're already on well and septic, or village water and sewer, they're not on well and septic, so that area was excluded, where your site was included from that standpoint, that there's potential that the TIF could assist with future public improvements in the area to benefit the property.
But we currently have sewer, we currently have wells and septics, and we had no intention of pulling in Cary sewer and water, so I'm just curious because I don't know, I know that also you had to meet a 50% requirement of 100-year-old homes. The community is well over 100 years. So I don't know, is that if there's 16 individual family homes there, is that something that met your 50% requirement?
No, the property by inclusion did not increase the threshold for meeting any specific requirement. It was specifically included for the potential to provide public utilities to that area. Generally, with any properties that are in the village, we're looking to eliminate well and septic just from a health and safety standpoint. So that's the main reason why your property was included, or it's unique property from the standpoint that there are multiple owners of the single parcel from the standpoint of the multiple homes that are there. But that parcel was specifically included for potential future connection to village utilities.
But the utilities would still have to be paid by the homeowners that are, the 16 homeowners that are currently there? Or
There
you're
be-
talking about totally having to redevelop that area by a developer.
So any service that would be provided, so if you were to connect to those utilities, should they be provided in the future, yes, the homeowners would need to pay for those utilities, you know, whatever the water rate is, you know, based on their usage from that standpoint. But the cost of extending those utilities out from where they currently terminate much further west, that would be potentially a cost that the TIF could cover and, you know, pay for from a standpoint that would not be a burden on the homeowners there that would have to pay for that long runs of water and sewer lines to get out to then be able to connect to that line.
So it had nothing to do with anything else except water and
Right.
sewer.
Because in our municipality, we require our homeowners to be tied into our water and sewer system. That's just, that's, with it, if you're in the corporate boundaries, yours is different because it's been there for so long. Any new development or anything, we actually have homeowners that are in unincorporated Cary that are begging us to be tied into our water and sewer. We're not gonna let that because we want just our regular municipal residents to benefit from that. So that's the only reason why we are looking at that, to be able to get the utilities there. Part of our last TIF 1 that it recently expired, we were able to bring water to the Sulky property, which would help us get to across the street to where, for lack of a reference, is where that furnishings place is, or the Spring Beach Inn, that, you know, to get down there, we can bring water down to that particular area, because across the street where that fresh furnishings or whatever, that currently is on well and
The
septic too.
kitchen place, you mean?
The kitchen place, they're within they have, I believe they're on city water and
Okay.
sewer. But our lift station was constructed behind there. You'll see a little small group of equipment that's over, that's our system to get the water. So we're trying to get it so actually the county wants us to make sure that we have as many people on our city water and sewer as possible. They're trying to get people off well and septic for the environment.
And we have to be in the TIF to do that?
Well, no, I think in the event that you want to do it, this will give us the opportunity to help you do that.
Okay.
We can get the water to where you need it, the sewer to get to where you need it to be.
Okay, and then.
Does that make sense?
It does. Can I go back to like slide 11 or 12? I just had a question because it was mentioning like, it was something about private, what we are.
In terms of the housing impact study?
Yeah, but I think it's, yeah,
The private sewer services?
you're on 16, 17, going the other way. It was like 12 or something.
I think it was slide 12.
And thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Glad we're here.
Yeah. I don't know if that was the 111 maybe? Shoot, I can't find it. It said something about private homeowners and basically that's what we are and what you were gonna do with the.
Are you talking, there's a blip about
Yeah.
private development opportunity?
Yes.
If we have a private, and I tell this all day long, the whole thing when we started talking about this, everybody thought we were gonna, like I mentioned last night,
Yeah.
eminent domain is like a huge word right now. Right now, the village has the capability to invoke eminent domain on a property that we see.
Anything, yeah.
But the TIF has nothing to do with that. You know, that has to do with, if say that your subdivision, I'm just guessing, decides that they want to sell the property, you have the right to sell your property. If you don't want to sell your property, you don't have to sell your property. There are businesses within the TIF district that have expressed interest in selling their property to provide better services or to help relocate them or to enhance their businesses. This is what this is for. We're not looking to displace anybody. We're not looking to change anything. Sure, there's going to be changes coming up, but we're not looking to change the way our community is and the charm that we have. We are all bound and determined to keep it the way it is, but we have to look at things that are going to help us get to the next level. So we're not looking at doing anything. I know we had this conversation last night. We're not looking at doing anything at Arlington Club.
It's just, was still curious about how we got in
You can
there
see why I
and-
didn't want to get into this last night.
Yeah, nope, that's fine. And then, there was, just so, when you say like, like Jack's Channel, does Jack Channel have water and sewer and,
No.
no, correct? Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anybody else? Do you want to come up here, please?
No, I can talk loud enough. Real quick question regarding the school district and that 40%. Now, if the school, if you build, let's use Maplewood as an example, just an example. If that's built out and there's 10 students out of that area, the school could request, or the district could request funds from that 40% for the students that are in there, right? Is that often? Is that every year? Is that a one-time deal? Is that, how is that handled?
It's every year.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, it's net new students. So if there were students who were already within the school district, so they weren't really new to the school district, that wouldn't count. But any net new students, and it's an annual calculation for as long as the TIF is in place.
Answer my question, thanks.
For the record, that was Mark Guerra.
Oh, sorry. With Terry Fire. Sorry.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes. Just name and address for the record, please.
Melissa Victor, as a resident of Cary. Can you please go back to that diagram in regards to the positive impact that this TIF is going to make? I believe it was.
Which slide? What slide was that?
I think it was like 6 or 7. It was like in the beginning. Yeah, go.
Oop, sorry.
Up. Right there. Okay, thank you. With a positive incremental value or revenue over time. Do you have a diagram in regards to the other TIF 1 and portion of 2 to also show that this was, these were also positive impacts?
Brian, do we have that on hand?
We don't have a graph like this generated for this meeting.
Okay. Or could you get one? If
It's-
need be, just to show the positivity that the TIFs 1 and portion of 2 did for the community, for the village.
Yeah, we have the reporting we've done annually for each TIF did indicate the type of revenue that the TIFs were generated, and those were reported annually to the JRB. This graph kind of simplifies exactly how it works or operates, but certainly we do have reporting to show how the previous TIFs have operated, and generally can show the type of improvements that have occurred within those TIFs.
Okay, I'm just think that it would be a lot easier for a lot of the public to understand, including myself, in regards to TIF 1 and 2, by seeing an actual visual diagram of that positivity. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to comment?
I think a lot of people have questions about the disbursement of the TIF. And I think maybe that's what is not as clear. My understanding is that the TIF is fully to support or to be a supplemental for private investment, right? Is there any way to use the TIF for public investment? Like if one of the, walking paths, bike paths, so you mentioned things like that, but it's really just for supplementing private investment. Is there a way for public investment to leverage or to submit for just, for funds?
Yeah, absolutely. You could use it for public investment to
Okay.
the extent, new water lines, new sewer lines, new sidewalks, attractive pavers, I mean, whatever the case may be. One of the things you obviously want to keep in mind from an economic standpoint is that you need the private investment to generate the dollars. But oftentimes you'll see that, besides the 40% set aside for schools, communities may say, we're going to set 20% of the increment aside for infrastructure improvements. So we're going to come down to 40 or 50% that we're willing to incentivize a developer. But those are all policies that the village board could consider as they go along.
And just like, to answer your question, like from the Park District's perspective, I had a conversation with one of the board members, and they were talking about the culvert. We have a failing culvert down at Veterans Park. That's something that the TIF is able to alleviate the flooding issues that we have over there. So I would look at that as a public improvement as well. And those are things that we could help offset the costs of any type of improvement that needs to be done. That's going to help mitigate any problems that's in that particular area.
And it's the same process, like whether you're private or public, the way you submit and we review it.
Right. Well, the expenses the JRB will meet on an annual basis, and we'll go over what happened during that previous year. We'll talk about any of the improvements, what the budgetary restraints are, the requirements are. Any expenditures from the TIF come from the village board.
Dan Gardner, I'm an economic development specialist with the village. Just the budget is up there, and to the contrary, more than 50% of the budget, that $60 million budget estimate, is for $32 million of public improvements. So a major portion of this is kind of thought of as that public investment, infrastructure, all the types of things that have been mentioned here that actually then spur economic development and incentivize people to reinvest in the area. So just want to highlight the fact that a big part of this TIF, the impetus is on those public improvements.
I think one question that was brought up in public comment is regarding the amount of revenue that was generated from TIF 1 and TIF 2. I think there's a concern out there that it didn't generate what was projected, and we're concerned about going through another third TIF now, in which the taxing bodies are taking up the risk of providing tax money to the village, and the village, again, is making another projection that this is the money that's going to be generated. And so that's the concern, that over the life of the TIF 1 and TIF 2, that wasn't met, and now there's a third TIF coming that we will potentially could participate in. I think that's where the concern comes from.
I could start with addressing that some, but with the staff. Those are very valid points. One of the things that we're seeing is that TIFs that were formed in, say, the mid-2000s, like 2005, 6, 7, 8, did not do very well, because you had the Great Recession that came on, and then you had a period of time in which developers were very reticent to have any kind of development, and then you went through a period of time into the early 2010s where what was hot was industrial development. Developers weren't looking to do commercial developments in downtowns. So this is not the first time that we've seen a TIF that was set up during that mid-2000 range not do very well. And sometimes it's necessary. We have participated in several situations in which it's necessary to just say that TIF's not working, there's circumstances economically beyond the village's control. We're better off terminating that TIF, releasing the surplus, and starting a new TIF over again. I don't know if, Brian, you want to add to that?
Yeah, certainly that's exactly the case that was the impact of TIF 2, is that when the TIF was created, it was 2006. EAVs went up for another 2 years prior to the recession in 2008, and then we saw a period village-wide, not just that TIF, of 6 years where the EAVs declined throughout the entire community. Because of that EAV decline, that TIF did not generate significant increment that helped finance the development. Also, that TIF, due to the size, was created for a specific project. There was a developer that was working with the village. That project did not go forward due to the recession and the events leading up to the recession. So the TIF never really generated increment, from a standpoint of funding for potential projects within that site. So the increment that TIF has created when the village does close that TIF would be reversed back to the taxing districts and your share of that based off your existing levies. TIF 1, there were projections as far as the type of development. Some of those projections have not been fully met. And that's why the village still sees that the goals of that TIF were to generate economic development in the area. We still see that need as kind of our mission to, encourage economic development in the community and potential development. So based on the fact that the TIF 1 has not generated that growth, those standards that kind of were existence when that TIF was created still exist there today. And that's where we believe it's necessary to be included within TIF 3 as proposed.
And just as I mentioned, like Renee was talking about, we were mentioning about bringing water and sewer down to your neck of the woods, we'll say, down by the river. And we were able to, public infrastructure improvements, we made a new lift station over there that can bring water to that part of our town, which we didn't have before. We would not have been able to afford to do that had we not had the TIF. So we now have water and sewer waiting for this, for the development. And one of the things, too, that was a holdup is, I look at, whenever I have conversations with people about economic development, you got to look at it at the most simplistic way. Look at it as a three-legged stool. You have to have a willing property owner, a willing buyer, and a village that wants to make things happen. If you don't have all three of those things together, it's never going to happen. A majority of TIF 1 was what we refer to as the sulky property. We did not have a willing property owner. We had many different developers wanting to look at that piece of property. They wanted to subdivide it. The property owner did not want to subdivide. So when you look at things in a simplistic way, we could have had a lot more there had we had a willing partner with the property owner. And from what we're hearing from the property owners and developers that are coming here, they're looking for assistance. And I have meetings after meetings after meetings with the first thing they say, what assistance can you offer us? So when we look at things at how we're going to, and I tell my board this, I tell people, I said, we are looking for sustainable growth for the next 50 years. We are responsible right now as elected officials to make sure that we succeed over the next 50 years, maybe even to 100 years. We've got a lot of vacant parcels and a lot of things that need to be addressed on Route 14. That's our big concern, is that we really want to make a positive impact to our residents, giving them additional services and places to go so that they can enjoy our community. So we look at these things holistically. So when we hear that TIF 1 failed, it didn't fail. It produced what we needed it to produce. Could it have been better? Yes. TIF 2, just bad timing, just really bad timing. And that was put together for one particular developer that asked for this. They were going to do something. But then we have no control over the economy. When the economy tanked, everything dried up. So we're looking to make this a little bit larger, to provide more of an increment so that we could help offset some of the costs for public improvement, private investment. Like we said, we need private investment to help us sustain ourselves into the future. So again, the three-legged stool, we have to have people that are willing to make things happen. And we're willing to make things happen.
And if I could add to that, Eric Morimoto, Village Administrator, the new TIF that we're proposing here is working towards, again, trying to encompass the best chance for success. You learn from what's occurred in other areas, and you build upon it. We saw what we had with our previous TIFs. We'll build upon it. It's strategized and strategically placed to make this as best of a chance to succeed. The size of it is intentional. It's not banking on one particular project. Like was mentioned before, it's a broad area in the central corridor. And like Mayor Koenig mentioned, the village is tasked with economic development and bringing growth and improvements that the community wants to see in the community to reality. And TIFs are one of those few tools available. We're competing with many, if not every other community around the area is doing the same thing with aiming for the same and striving for the same kind of improvements, particularly around downtowns and commercial corridors. As a non-home rule community, we have very limited options, but this has been deemed the most appropriate option, like our consultant mentioned. It's one that does not increase the taxes for the property owners. They continue to pay the same taxes that they do in or out of the TIF district, and it enables us to enact these broad, large-scale improvements and large benefits but also helps us conserve the community in the areas that want to be improved and enhanced. I think you saw some of the options in the budget that are out there for smaller scale improvements. So we are not putting all the eggs in one basket with this TIF. That's the difference between TIF 3 proposed and the previous two. We've sized it right to make sure that the basket's the right size and the eggs are distributed evenly to make sure we succeed and the best chances for success.
Yeah, and I do appreciate, speaking for the district, the village's advocacy to spur on development within the village of Cary. I think we'd all want that. Our concern is using the TIF as a tool to get to that development. So that's where our concern comes from, and I appreciate you, Mayor, and the work that you've done, but we also have a responsibility to the school district to ensure that their interests are also met through the funding and new revenue of the school district.
I appreciate that. One of the things that, the other tasks that I have in my collaborative efforts regionally is I'm the chairman of the board for the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. And I attended a meeting with Governor Pritzker. And he proudly touted to us when we're looking for the monies that they take from us every year that we're missing. To the village of Cary over the last 11 years that they take money away from us, it's substantial. It's like over $1 million. And he's telling us that since he became governor, he's increased the school funding by 6% from 24 to 30. And he's, in this current new budget, he's giving more monies to the school districts. So I'm trying to figure out how we could all work together to get these things done. When people talk about the size of our TIF, geographically it looks large, but it's our we have our commercial corridor on Route 14. That's what people see when they come through our community. The whole TIF district, out of the 7,200 parcels that are within the village of Cary, there's 252 parcels that are affected by this TIF. I believe the school district has almost 8,700 parcels that contribute in 2 years. It's 252 or 253 parcels that are affected by this. The same with the high school district. I mean, there are a substantial amount. This is not like it's 50% of the parcels in there. It's a small number of parcels. You know, we did this so it wouldn't, we could, people talk about, why didn't we include this or why didn't we do that? We had somebody come and say, why aren't you making it bigger? Because we're doing what we feel is best for the village of Cary, to have the best growth, the most bang for our buck for what we think our need. The two big things that we're worrying about right now is our Route 14 corridor and our commercial downtown district. All the seminars and everything that we go to with regards to downtown districts, if you have a thriving downtown district, you will have a thriving community. I go to seminars after seminars after seminars. Back me up on that, Dan. We go to these, and they said if you invest all your money and you invest into your central downtown district, you're going to have an incredible community. And we do. Look at some of these other communities that don't have a thriving downtown district. They're struggling. We want to be on that other side of that. We want to continue. We've got don't get me wrong, we've got an incredible downtown. We want to make it a little bit better. We want to help our business owners down there. We want to make sure that we're able to give them the benefit of the TIF to improve their facade or add on or do whatever they want to do. That's what this is about. We're not looking to, blow up the downtown and make it something new and exciting. I think our downtown is exciting. We've got a lot of new things that are coming there. People are reinvesting. We have current business owners reinvesting in our downtown right now. We have another new restaurant coming in downtown. We're talking with another restaurateur that wants to build another restaurant in our downtown. People like to be here, and we want to be able to grab onto this. We want to make sure that we keep that momentum going, that we're sustainable, that we're setting up our future for success. And what we're saying is, out of every single taxing district, it's 252 parcels. That's what it is. It's only 252 parcels. Dan,
Yeah,
did you?
I don't want to get into debating with you, Mayor, but You know, we also believe that quality schools make a quality village, and that's what makes a village thrive. So we also believe that. We also believe that the school district has to be financially secure. As you know, we went through a financially challenging time, 2010, 2011, when we had to close schools, we had to release staff. We don't want to go back down that road. So our interest here, as I represent the board and the students and staff, is to make sure that doesn't happen.
Sure.
And to make sure that we have the revenue, right? That we also maintain quality schools so that our students and staff can also thrive, that can also, you know, help the village in that way.
Right.
We are just not in favor of using the TIF as a tool to get there.
Sure.
That's where our concern comes from. We don't believe that, based on past history of the other two TIFs, I know you've given some reason for those, we just don't believe that's going to happen again. But yet the district's going to be, or could be required to use their tax money. We have 15 acres of Maplewood, as you know, that's part of the redevelopment plan. It's a big chunk of the property that we could potentially lose out on new growth of that 15 acres. And that's revenue that is concerning for us.
Well, I believe that we've sent you a document stating that there are mechanisms in place that we can help mitigate that situation. We're willing to work with the school districts with regard to this. Like Phil had mentioned before, there are mechanisms in place for school districts and libraries. We thrive in our community, and yes, schools are an enormous part of the success of our community. And we understand where you're coming from, but we have proposed various options to help you get there. And if we can sit down and talk about these things and put them into reality and say, look, these are things that are very viable mechanisms produced by the TIF that we can help offset the cost of these things. You're in a very unique situation. Now, corral me, gentlemen, if I'm going off the beaten path here, but you own the property in a TIF. You're a government agency. And there are mechanisms in place that we can help from a TIF with additional costs that you may be able to get through the life of the TIF because you're the property owner and you're a taxing district. So there are ways that we can help you. We will look at anything. We're not looking at closing everything down and saying, no, this is the way we're going to do it. We want to be collaborative about it. We want to make sure that everybody feels good about it. And we want to make sure that we're setting ourselves up for success. Every one of the taxing districts has something to gain from this. So I understand where you're coming from, Mr. Coleman,
Yeah.
Dr. Coleman.
Yeah, and
if I could just-
I feel like as a school district that we have been meeting with the village. We've met with Mr. Gardner over there for this last year. We have been looking at alternatives to get the property sold and redevelopment at that point. So I'm not sure where that comment is coming from because we've been working. I've been there for 15 years as superintendent. We've met several times with Brian Simmons and previous administrators to look at possible solutions to that. So I know there are mechanisms in place. We haven't gotten an offer from the village, about the financials related to those. That would be something that I would be willing to look at. But again, the concern is we're not against the development of Cary. I live here. I've been here for 35 years. We're not against the development and taking the village to the next step. We're just not in favor of using this financial tool, TIF, in order to get the village that direction. We've tried to sell the property now. We've had multiple buyers sign multiple purchase agreements. As you know, they've come to the village for the government approval, and for reasons, different reasons, it doesn't go through. And so we don't believe a TIF is needed to entice developers to come in. I mean, that was 2021, in which we had a purchase agreement for 15 acres at Maplewood. And it fell off because of that, because of the conditions we feel the village had put on the developer. So again, we don't think, I know you've had talked about the but-for test, we don't believe it passes that. The TIF passes that criteria, because we've had developers come in and to want to purchase that property.
Okay, let's. You've opened this door here. Let's
I don't
walk
want
through
to
it.
be in a debate.
Well,
I know I don't want to go beyond
but
this, but
this is a public forum, and I think that it's important to know where we stand from this.
that's fine. That's fine.
I've been mayor since 2013. In that time, there's been 3 offers on that particular property that have been brought to our attention. The first one was Mr. Sova, who was asking for help. He wanted money for help. We told him that any new development in that area, we need a road. There's no way that you can, he wanted to have like 300 units over there. First of all, we have a responsibility to our community to encourage development that's something that will fit in with what we need, what the community wants and what the existing neighbors will put up with. We needed an extra road to offset the downtown. There would be really 2 roads that you'd be able to exit that piece of property. He ended up going away because he wanted money from it. He wanted TIF money, he wanted other types of financial things. We just couldn't do it. We came to a really close agreement with Mr. Taylor. He had a great prop. He had an awesome plan. He worked with all the residents. He went through many, many different meetings with the village and public meetings, and that was a great opportunity for us. He listened to what we want. He reduced the size. And at that particular time, it just wasn't going to work out. He ended up losing, he wasn't able to capitalize the project. So, I think we might have dodged a bullet there. This last developer, who was that, AR?
AR.
AR, they came in, not one person, owner from that company came in to talk with us. They sent a consulting engineer. They wanted to put in 300 units. We told them that we needed a road. They said they didn't need a road. They wouldn't put in a park. The community wanted a park. We wanted garages because the community and the luxury apartments, we wanted garages. They wouldn't do that. We extended our the time to have this discussion for what we want. We're just not going to plug something in somewhere. They wanted an absorbent amount of units in an area that just wasn't going to work. When you look at their scope, we have like I mentioned before, we have an incredible downtown district. And we want something that's going to enhance that, that's going to fit in, that's going to be part of the community. We wanted something that was going to look there. They wouldn't talk with us regarding architecture, density, the garages, the layout. They wouldn't have a conversation with us. And they ended up going away. I have an obligation, as well as our board has an obligation, to make sure whatever development we bring to this community fits in with what our community wants. So that said, yeah, you had 3 offers on the property, but when you have an entire community that we want to benefit from that, and it's a hot topic. I deal with that conversation every day about Maplewood. Every single Brian, there is. I bet you on my email right now. I got an email about Maplewood and what we're going to do with the baseball field. But anyway, I digress. So we're well aware of this, and we try to. That's why we through our PUD programs and through our new, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank, UDO program. We give developers an opportunity to come and talk to us before they spend a dime in here, before spending any money going to the ZPA to see if this round peg will fit in a square hole, or this square peg will fit in a round hole. We open up our conversation. We debate this. We encourage the development. We say, look, can you do this? Can you do that? I think that's pro-development. That's letting them know up front what the village is looking for. So those 3 things, yeah, I'm sorry that it didn't turn out, but the buck stops in this building when it comes to bringing meaningful development. We're just not going to put something there. We want to put the right thing there. And we've been talking about creating a new TIF in the downtown. Brian, how many developers have called us about various things?
We have interest from about less than a dozen, about 10 developers right now.
Because they all want financial help to get these things done. And
before I jump in, Mayor, just to that effect as well, from the previous developers that we did have discussions with, kind of looking at the but-for test, if you will, some of the requests that the village had for a project, looking at the Maplewood Road, access roadway for lack of a better term, the last developer, we did have discussions with them to say if the road is a request, were they able to pursue the project or not? And they were not, from a financial standpoint, without some participation from the village for that roadway, which would come potentially through the benefit of a TIF. We also have had discussions with developers recently that have interest in the property and understand that the roadway is a request for that project to move forward based on the densities that they're proposing. And it's not something that they could pursue without having some sort of financial assistance through a TIF or financial mechanism from that standpoint. So we do continue to have interest in Maplewood being one property. There are other properties in the village that also have development interests that, due to the challenges that there are of developing them from a utility standpoint or other public improvements that would be required to serve those developments, the TIF would kind of negate that but-for requirement or meet that but-for requirement to make those developments feasible.
Thank you. There was another question back here. Did you want to? Yeah, come on up.
Not to change the subject again, but getting back to the Arlington Club, which is right by Jack's Channel. When you said that they would help bring city water and sewer and help, are you going to be charging the property owners to bring that water and sewer in also?
So that would be, if the TIF were to extend those utilities
Yeah.
to that area, it potentially could pay for those improvements. So any connections to those utilities, that's a board decision whether or not there's a charge for a tap-on fee to connect to those utilities. But to extend the utilities to that point would be something that the TIF could pay for, as opposed to the residences paying for that 1,000-foot, extension.
Okay. What is a roundabout tap-on fee cost?
The tap-on fees, it depends on what the size of your service is. So a home, single-family home would have a fee of roughly $5,000 to tap onto the utilities. Again, the TIF could potentially offset those costs for those residences that wanted to connect to the village utilities if they are extended out to that standpoint.
Thank you. You answered my question. Thank you. Thank you.
And it also adds kind of the expanded benefit of, should the wells or the septics on those properties not become usable, I believe the health department has jurisdiction over the septic systems and that matter. But if they're unable to be utilized for one reason or another, age or location, environmental reasons, then oftentimes the connection to a public water supply and sewer system is required. And this TIF would then enable that process, if it were to happen or be needed, at least give another mechanism to help the property owners, because that would be their responsibility if there were no TIF.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Trustee Weinhammer, you had a question?
I just want to ask a question as a resident.
Sure.
Trustee. I just had a quick question for clarification. When it does come down to a vote, you had said 5 of 7 members, but we only have 6, because you only vote in if it's a tie, correct?
Or a supermajority is needed.
Okay. And then my other question is, I know we've talked a lot about, or the board has talked about, and you have talked a lot about eminent domain. So let's, the TIF could be, if decided by the board, up to 23 years. So in the event, let's just pretend that District 26 didn't sell Maplewood immediately, and some time went on. Would you ever, an attorney could answer this, foresee using eminent domain to gain that property from the school district? Like, that is something that is that a possibility, I guess?
Scott, I don't think so. I don't think our board would have that type of an appetite to do something like that. What we could do is, well, go ahead.
Well, there are some complications in acquiring property from another public body. I don't know that we need to go too deeply into that, but there are some additional complications in that respect. So I think it's unlikely that we would be exercising eminent domain relative to another public body's property.
It has to benefit the general public as a whole. I don't think that our board, as you will know, has any we have never talked about that. We don't have an appetite with it. There's other projects that we're currently working on in the village that could be quite substantial. And, if something comes along, we'll help and we'll do what we can. But as you know, we have never had a conversation about eminent domain and any parcel in the village of Cary.
No, I know a lot of residents do come and ask about it. So I was just listening when it said, you know, you have to have the developer and the homeowner wanting to work together to go ahead and sell their property.
Right.
But what happens, you know, because you can use eminent domain in the event that perhaps that they don't want to work together?
Well, I think it's different, correct me if I'm wrong, with another taxing district. I think it has more to do with private properties and private ownership.
Again, without getting into this too deeply, trying to condemn the property of another public body that's problematic. I'm not sure it's possible, so.
And I don't-
If I could just add to that, from a practical standpoint, what you normally see is that the buyer and seller are agreed that they want to make the transaction work, but it's a dollar gap. So a developer looks at it and says, I'm sorry, I can't pay for more than $250,000 for this property. And the private party says, I'm sorry, but I won't accept less than $350,000. Well, where the TIF can help there is to bridge that gap. $100,000 of TIF money could be used to provide what the willing seller homeowner wants and satisfy the development. That's the practical reality of what normally happens.
Okay. And then, just backing up to somebody else's question, so I know that it sounds like there's maybe a difference of opinion. TIF 1 and 2 TIF 1 and TIF 2 were not successful, right? I know you were saying that your belief was that they were, but.
I believe that TIF number 1 was successful. I do. I believe TIF number 2 was challenging. First of all, it's too small. It was set in place for a particular developer. The economy tanked, and what are you going to do? I think one property on there did any significant improvements that would incur the growth that we had needed. That's why there's like $190,000 in there right now, which if we cancel this or end this TIF here, all that money will go back to the taxing districts. So, yeah, I would admit that that was not a very successful TIF, but it was due to a lot of economics, we'll say. And there was a developer that wanted to do something there. They would do it if we had a TIF. That was before my time. So it was in 2006. But from what our research tells us is that the TIF was put in place to help that, and then the economy tanked. And there was nothing going on. So I will agree to disagree with you on TIF number 1. I think it was successful. We've got some great public improvements there that otherwise a private entity would have to pay for. It's already there, ready to go. TIF number 2 was a challenge.
So you guys would not be able to produce a picture as the previous resident had requested to show that TIF 1 was successful then?
Well, I think we could put together what the increments were during it and what the expenditures were, what the JRB is responsible for, sure.
So you're saying that for TIF 1, you could show a graph showing that it was successful?
I'm assuming we could put it into a graph form.
Yeah, we have the documentation as far as how the TIF performed, what the increment was that it generated, and what developments have occurred within the TIF. I will say that because of the recession, the Great Recession that we did experience, the EAVs for that area have decreased from what they were when the TIF was originally created. That's standard for the entire village. So just by looking at the equalized assessed value for either one of those TIFs, they will be lower than what they were when they were created due to that recession. Our EAV for the community is just now getting back up to levels it was prior to 2008 recession. So there's ways that we can show, the graph that is illustrated that shows the EAV growing up. That's if everything remaining equal, there's no fluctuation in the base EAV. The economy for the rest of the area is basically if you maintain a certain starting point, if there's no growth, this is the type of development that could occur. But the reality is, the economic development market that we live in changes from year to year. What we live in today is not the same as it was in the 1990s from a development standpoint. The type of development that the communities we're seeing is more retail focused. Now you're seeing, a couple of years ago was more industrial focused, and now you're seeing more rental housing type, infill type development. So we can't say for certain 5 years, 10 years from now what type of development you're going to see in this area, but that's kind of the factors that went into what affected TIF 1 and TIF 2.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Sure. Anybody else have any questions?
All right, I just wanted to go back and clarify, if I'm not sure I made this point clearly before, but with respect to the budget, besides the 42% set aside for the school districts and the library district, there's also part of that can be used for capital costs. So to the extent that any of the districts have property within the TIF district, money can be used for capital costs. Just for an example, if you were to put improvements into Maplewood School, if that's what you wanted to do, TIF money could be allocated for that. In fact, the city of Chicago has used a whole bunch of TIF money for public schools within the city. That's one point. And then the other point is that a lot of times we assume, and certainly Brian's elaborated upon the fact, developers ask for TIF. What developers are really asking for is money. They want to make it work, okay? One of the things that I think the village prudently does not want to do is to reduce impact fees, to do things that, impact fees for the park district, for the schools, for the library, whoever receives those now, you don't want to reduce that. So you're trying to make up, part of the but-for argument is to say, okay, we want to make sure that all the taxing districts are treated fairly if, and I emphasize if, the Maplewood School site is going to be sold, we want to make sure that the school district gets a good, equitable, fair, and high price for that. If indeed there's going to be some improvements in the park district, we want to make sure we're able to do that. So it's really, it's the economic differential that TIF provides a technique to try and make up for it in various ways.
Yeah, I just had a question. Are you saying that there are mechanisms in the TIF that would make the school district whole of the money that it contributes based on the tax revenue?
If a school is within a TIF district and it needs capital and costs, yes, TIF money can be used for that.
And TIF money can be used to help relocate the bus barn and the baseball.
Yeah, I want to just go back to a couple things that were said before, just very quickly. And some, the mayor had pointed out the kind of the core, and that is really strengthening that core is what you want to do in any community. You just like almost holistically with a body, just weak core, everything else kind of fails around it. Strong core, you build off of that, and this is really the kind of the core of the community. What I am seeing and what I'm charged with, and when I've been doing this for a long time, is it's a competitive, very competitive environment in a competitive region. So with few exceptions, rarely are any type of development targeting or end user targeting a specific community. In some cases they are, but it's regional. We're looking at Crystal Lake, Algonquin. We're looking at a regional McHenry, if not bigger, Chicago region. The competitive advantage is usually what can you do for us either, or what can, fill that gap. There are incentives in other communities, and it's not about giving money away. It's about meeting a need that some other can be met in some other context. And sometimes that's an infrastructure. The road you had pointed out, the road is often a deal breaker for a developer. I can't afford to build that road, but if the municipality builds the road, that changes things. And that only changes the dynamic of a cost that I don't have to absorb as a developer, if I'm the developer, but it also enhances the marketability of that property, which then puts that property, that development, ahead of the game of other places where we can move on to. There is no us and them here. This is a holistic community, and it's, and that's demonstrated by the dialogue, as Superintendent Coleman pointed out, that we've had this ongoing dialogue because everybody has an interest in the success of Cary, and that's the parks, the schools, the library, everything that goes into making Cary. So the extent that all of this goes down to the investment and the potential to strengthen that core, that strengthens Cary, that strengthens everybody, and all the parts come together. So as I am going out and talking to the development community and trying to bring people in here, or keep people for that matter, people that say, what I want to stay here, I want to expand, I want to do things, hey, but there's road improvements, there's utilities, there's things that need to be done in order to enhance that ability to stay, because somebody else is prepared to poach businesses or attract them or provide the impetus to bring them into another location. That's where this comes into play. That's the importance of having this mechanism in place. Nobody knows 10 years from now where this is going to be, but we have to start here today. And that's what this is all about, is that starting point, continuing that dialogue between everybody to make sure that everybody, is, on the same page in terms of the end goal here. But this process has to start here, and it's a lengthy process. So that's the importance of this area in particular in terms of the TIF, because it is the core of the community.
Any other comments?
I'm sorry, I have one more.
Sure.
Most of my questions and comments have been answered. The one question that we had as a school district is, it appears that some parcels from TIF 1 and TIF 2 are being folded into TIF 3. Is that correct? Are becoming a part of TIF 3? Brian, I don't know if you can speak to that.
Part of TIF 2 will be in TIF 3, but TIF 2 has to be closed down first. And at the time it's closed down, any surplus has to be distributed to the taxing districts.
Okay, and the village can determine how that can be folded into TIF 3? Like a TIF 2, any TIF is 23 years, correct? The lifespan of the TIF?
Yeah, actually, the process is called DTIF, RETIF.
Okay.
And statutorily, it's permitted. I'll yield to counsel on that, but I think I'm right on that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants to go to law school here, but this process is a process from the outset to meet the statutory criteria to establish a new TIF. So we are not extending, by definition, following all the criteria to establish a new TIF. We're not extending an old TIF that would require legislative approval. We're not relying
That's my question I was asking you.
Right, so we're not relying on criteria that were essentially relied on 23 years ago to extend a TIF. We're here today, and we have been working on this now for several months, to satisfy the statutory criteria to establish a brand-new TIF, even if it includes some property that was previously in another TIF.
Thank you.
We're at the end of our agenda. You have a copy of the agenda, right? Sure, yeah, we've been entertaining questions as we go along, so if you have any questions, feel free.
So I will ask a question now. So comment was just made that TIF money can be used for ball fields in Maplewood. Is somebody here walking through exactly how that would happen? Because my understanding is that TIF money must be used within the TIF district. And I'm not aware that there's a location for ball fields to be built inside the TIF district. So someone, either the consultant, Ryan, somebody walk me through how that happens.
So the ball fields that are on the Maplewood property, if that property were to redevelop, there is the ability for the village through the TIF to relocate improvements that are on that property that are owned by the property owner. So in that case, with School District 26 owning the property, they own the ball fields, and they also own the bus barn facility that's there. So the TIF could provide direct assistance to relocate the bus barn elsewhere in the community and potentially finance or assist with the finance of that relocation expense. In the regards to the ball fields, those would, in theory, they're owned by the school district. They'd be relocated to another site that would not be owned by the school district. So the TIF could not pay for the relocation of those improvements. However, through a redevelopment agreement with a developer, there could be an incentive that the developer pays additional funds to another taxing body that could then develop those fields. So they could be constructed elsewhere in the community. It wouldn't need to be specifically within the TIF, but it'd be similar to a impact fee that a taxing district, which the Park District would currently receive. It could be an additional payment in addition to those that can be utilized for the construction of ball fields elsewhere in the community.
And then who would decide what those impact fees? Because we typically see impact fees working off a formula that's already in place. So, walking through how fees then would be developed for that.
So it would be through negotiation with the developer. Certainly, with the impact fees that we currently have in place, those could be a negotiating point as well with a developer, whether the developer would pay those fees or the developer would pay those fees through the increment that the TIF would generate. Certainly could be part of an agreement with them, individual developer for the redevelopment of a site. And then whatever those costs or contribution would be through negotiation with the developer of what would be reasonable to contribute towards potential relocation or development of those facilities elsewhere in the community. So to your specific issue with the Park District, the impact fees that the Park District have would be one fee that, we could collect as part of a development that we've already have the formulas established based on the per unit fee that would be there. And then in addition to that, there could be another fee that could be requested from a developer through a redevelopment agreement that can then specify additional funds that go to the district as well for the relocation of those types of facilities.
So I might not have stated my question very well, trying to do a great job of answering it. My question is, how do the fees get determined? So if you negotiate with the developer and you determine that, I say that ball field development on a park property is going to be $5 million, and you negotiate with the developer and the developer is willing to provide $500,000, that's not helping. It helps. We're still pretty far away.
Correct.
So there's a formula for impact fees that may be aware of the future.
Right.
There is no formula for this part of the negotiation.
That's correct.
How does that happen to make the Park District whole, or more so to say, make the community whole who lost those fields and want something in return for that elsewhere within the community?
Certainly, that's part of a negotiation with the developer that we would need to explore kind of what the potential impacts for their development would be. Again, you would also be looking at how much time would be left in the TIF that could potentially assist with that type of cost. So if you're looking at a developer were to redevelop the property today, there's the full 23 years potentially could generate increment that could go towards that cost. But if you're looking 5-10 years down the line, there may not be as much potential for the TIF or a developer to contribute towards those types of improvements. But to your point or your question, as far as how that is negotiated or what, there's no specific formula that we would have to determine what that additional cost would be. That would just be through a negotiation for a redevelopment agreement to determine what the developer may be willing to do, what that site redevelopment may generate from a increment standpoint, and what the village's ability to participate in that would be. So the goal in that scenario would be that we would generate some sort of payment that would go to the taxing body to offset the cost of relocating those facilities. Will it be 100%? I can't guarantee that it would be 100% of what the cost would be to construct facilities elsewhere in the community. Mhm.
Anybody else have any other questions? Yes, sir.
If you could help, well, first of all, let me start off by McHenry County. So McHenry County generally supports the economic development efforts of our municipal partners. And we thank you for looking at community and best ways that you can improve your community, because that improves the overall county. I also want to say McHenry County celebrates our collaborative partnership with the Village of Cary on recent endeavors such as our joint law enforcement training facility, which will have a regional benefit to our community and generate a lot of public good by ensuring we're going to have well-trained law enforcement. So I think that's a great thing, and I want to acknowledge that. My question is, can you help us understand how or why the recent successes out of TIF number 1 are back incorporated into TIF number 3, and namely the CVS site, the Burger King site, the Thornton site, even the redevelopment and preparation on the Salke property? Why would they be included in this TIF, since that redevelopment effort has already occurred by virtue of TIF number 1?
Certainly. So we, when we're establishing the TIF through discussions with the village board, of the original concept ended the TIF at kind of the ComEd power lines. It was on the eastern border for it. And then as we were going through discussions with the board, the request was to include the Jack's Channel property, so extending the TIF out to that point. We did originally exclude the CVS parcel from that. There was a continuity issue from a standpoint of the intersection at 14 and Main Street. By having that parcel not in the TIF, created an issue from the connection of parcels across that intersection. And likewise with the Burger King site, it became vacant during the process, the planning process, so there may be additional improvements that could be necessary in that area, not just for that parcel, but the entire corner, that eastern corner of that intersection, western corner of that intersection, if you will. That was included from that purpose. In the Thornton's piece, there still is potential public improvements that would go with the Salke property. There's the water main extension that they produce for, or sewer extension that they produce for us that connects to the lift station. But there still could potentially be water main improvements through that site that would be necessary, which is why those sites were included.
Anybody else have any questions? Next on the agenda is the potential scheduling of another joint review board meeting, or is there anybody willing to make a recommendation to, make a motion to make a recommendation to the village board?
Sorry, the next one needs to be 30, it is 30 days, or are we looking at the first?
Brian, did you want to go over the timeline again, please?
Yeah, so from a vote standpoint, a recommendation standpoint, the JRB needs to make a recommendation within 30 days of today's meeting. So that could be today's meeting if that's the will of the board. However, if there's a need for an additional review board meeting, that recommendation would have to come before July 7th, which would be the 30 days from today.
I would request of this joint board that it does schedule an additional meeting. Speaking only for myself, I'm here representing the Board of Commissioners, but I do not have direction from my board to approve or vote no against this. This is informational gathering process with our understanding of what this meeting is, and certainly would like the opportunity to go back and speak again with our board, and hopefully there to arrive at a consensus direction that they'll provide to me that I can certainly share when that vote is brought forth with regard to the Cary Park District and where it stands on it. So I request that we have an additional meeting so that we might have opportunity to have that conversation with our elected board, as a courtesy.
We can convene a meeting before that, if I'm not mistaken. before the 30 days.
Yes.
So, what does everybody else think here? Do you need an additional meeting? Are you ready to make a determination right now? Additional meeting?
We're ready to make a determination, but I hear what the partners are saying and provide an opportunity to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I would also like an additional meeting. I would also maybe make a motion for 1 week from today, 3 o'clock.
I will be unable to make a meeting one. I was going to, 1 week from today. Could we do June 27th? Three o'clock? I would say the 20th, but we have a village board meeting that night. And I have no idea how long this would go. Is that okay, Mr. Euler? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to extend the next meeting to June 27th at 3 o'clock here at the Municipal Center.
Kendrick County will make that motion?
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We will reconvene on the 27th of June at 3 o'clock. We're continuing. Scott, do I need to adjourn the meeting? Do I need a motion to adjourn the meeting?
No, it's continued.
Okay. Correct.